What started as a smug attempt to embarrass her in front of a full dining room ended with the entire restaurant frozen in silence and egos deflated on the spot. You won't believe how she turned the tables with nothing but her raw, unpolished talent. It was a wild Saturday night in Charleston, South Carolina, and the low murmur of conversation drifted through Bellamy's elegant bistro nestled in the heart of the city. The soft clatter of silverware, the gentle shuffle of the waitstaff, and the rich tones of live jazz floating from a baby grand in the corner painted the perfect portrait of sophistication. Anna, 24 years old, moved gracefully from table to table. Her calm presence and quiet fire behind the eyes gave her a quiet dignity. She carried entrees in one hand and offered polite smiles with the other, just another uniformed figure to most guests. But beneath that pressed apron and careful composure lived a different story. Anna had dreams bigger than the velvet-covered chairs and crisp white tablecloths around her. Anna lived for music. The piano had been her voice since childhood, her comfort, her escape, her identity. But reality didn't ask for concertos, it asked for rent. Her job at Bellamy's was never the dream. It was a stopgap, a temporary hold between the life she had and the one she hoped for, a place at the conservatory where she could once again let her music speak. Only a few people knew her secret. A handful of co-workers had stumbled upon her during quiet moment, tucked away in the back storeroom, fingers dancing softly over the keys of an old, slightly out-of-tune upright piano. They knew she could play. What none of them knew was just how far that hidden gift would carry her before the night was over. That night, as the dining room of Bellamy's softened into its familiar rhythm, the kind that settles in after the dinner rush, something shifted. The door opened, and in walked Richard Whitman. Even before his name was whispered among the staff, his presence said everything. He moved with the ease of someone used to being watched, admired, and rarely questioned. A tech billionaire with a reputation that preceded him, Richard had become a regular at Charleston's high-end establishments, not for his taste in cuisine, but for his flair for spectacle. He wore his confidence like a tailored suit, deliberate, expensive, and slightly too loud. Behind him trailed three younger men, well-dressed and equally aware of their surroundings, each basking in the reflected light of his status. The staff knew what his arrival meant. Richard didn't come for dinner, he came to be seen. Anna, on the other hand, didn't break stride. She was carrying a tray of appetizers to a table by the window, her movements fluid and composed. But as she passed, she felt the sudden pressure of being noticed. Not the pleasant kind. The kind that comes with calculation. Richard's eyes had settled on her. There was no reason for it. She wasn't the loudest, the flashiest, or the most visible in the room, but something about her quiet focus drew him in. He watched her move with effortless grace, and somewhere behind that amused smile of his, something stirred. Anna was unaware of the look, or if she sensed it, she chose not to acknowledge it. She focused instead on what she could control: her tray, her footing, her next table. But Richard had already decided. She would be the center of tonight's attention. Anna didn't grow up in a world of pressed linen napkins and crystal glasses. Her childhood had been simple, shaped by the hum of cicadas, the scent of pine trees after rain, and the constant thrum of responsibility. She was the oldest of three in a small Georgia town where dreams were a luxury, and practicality came first. Her mother, a nurse with a tired back and kind hands, did everything she could. There were nights she came home still wearing her scrubs, her shoes stained and her eyes heavy, but she never complained. She made sure the light stayed on, the pantry had just enough, and the children felt safe even when the world outside the walls didn't. In that house stood an old, upright piano, slightly off-key and gifted by a neighbor who was moving away. To Anna, it wasn't just furniture, it was an invitation. She taught herself to play slowly, first by mimicking familiar hymns, then gradually exploring the pages of sheet music she found at the town library. Her fingers learned to speak a language she didn't yet have words for. She played wherever they'd let, her church services, community events, school recitals. People listened. Some clapped. A few told her she should go far. But life didn't wait for applause. By the time she turned 19, the math no longer added up. Financial aid fell through, her mother's health bills grew, dreams were packed away with folded clothes and childhood keepsakes. Survival came first. Charleston offered work, and Bellamy's offered a steady paycheck. But there was one thing that quietly drew her there. A grand piano in the corner of the dining room. She never asked to play it. She didn't need to. Just seeing it reminded her that music hadn't left her life completely. It had simply been waiting like a door she hadn't dared to open. Richard Whitman wasn't simply observing Anna that Neith was plotting, and before the evening was over, she would become the centerpiece of a performance she never asked to be part of. The night unfolded like so many others before it. Laughter filtered through the space like steam from a pot left to simmer. The soft clink of forks against china, wine being poured. Somewhere in the background, the piano played itself into the edges of everyone's attention. The music was ambient, like wallpaper, pleasant, forgettable. Anna kept her pace steady, doing her best to keep her gaze elsewhere, to avoid the persistent stare she could feel following her from across the room. She'd dealt with difficult guests before, entitled, demanding, loud, but something about this man unsettled her in a different way. It wasn't just arrogance, it was intentional, calculated. His presence seemed to fill more space than it should. There was a tension to it that prickled against her skin. By the time appetizers were served, Richard had already begun his own brand of theater. He wasn't the kind of man who simply dined, he held court. With a raised glass and a booming voice, he spun exaggerated tales of business wins and luxury retreats. Between the bravado were quiet, condescending remarks, aimed at people who play it small, dreamers without follow-through, or talent wasted on mediocrity. His companions laughed dutifully. Guests at surrounding tables exchanged weary looks, eyebrows raised, clearly fatigued by the performance. Anna, meanwhile, kept her eyes on the work until she returned to his table with a bottle of red. "So tell me, Anna," he said, raising his voice just enough for the nearby diners to catch it. "What does someone like you dream of when you're not serving lamb chops?" She hesitated, setting the bottle down gently. "I play piano," she said, softly but clearly. His grin widened. "Charming. Well, now's your moment. Give us a show." He gestured grandly toward the piano. Conversations dimmed, eyes turned. Anna froze. "I can't," she said, trying to laugh it off. "I'm just working." "Nonsense," he said louder. "There it is, right there. Big dreams need big moments. Or are you just another waitress who talks big?" A few people snickered. The air grew tight. Her co-workers stared from afar. No one moved. "Come now," he said, reaching forward and, in an appalling breach of decency, he tapped her apron with the back of his fingers just above her waist. "No harm in a little entertainment." The touch, subtle as it was, sent a jolt through her. Not pain, but the sting of being diminished, objectified, played like a joke. Anna's cheeks flushed, not with embarrassment, but fury. Something inside her cracked. "Don't touch me," she said, firm but calm. The table fell silent. Even Richard blinked. Then, with a smirk curling again on his lips, he reclined. "Feisty, but still afraid, I see." Her pulse pounded in her ears. She looked around once more. Her manager turned away. Her fellow staff didn't move. Her fingers curled into fists. And then she heard it. Her mother's voice, gentle but unwavering. "Don't let anyone decide your worth for you." Anna turned to the piano, then back to Richard. And slowly, deliberately, she stepped forward. Each stride was heavy with defiance. Not toward him, but toward the silence she'd swallowed for years. She reached the piano. And as she sat, hands trembling just slightly, she looked up, her voice steady. "I'll play." And with that, she let her fingers find the truth he could never touch. The first note was barely a whisper, but it struck like a spark in the dark. A breath of truth expelled into a room filled with performance. Anna's fingers, still trembling from what had come before, now moved like silk over the keys. She didn't perform. She didn't seek to entertain. She revealed. Each note rang like a pulse from her chest, and with it, the sting of Richard's humiliation began to fade not from memory, but from dominance. This was no longer about him. This was her reclaiming. The crowd remained still, as if any sudden movement might shatter the moment. Conversation ceased. Forks remained untouched. Even the servers stood frozen in quiet awe. Time suspended itself between ivory and silence. Anna poured into the piano not music, but memory. Her childhood in a worn-down house with sun-faded curtains and a mother who sang lullabies while cooking dinner. Her teenage years, when dreams folded between bus schedules and discount shoes, and all the quiet nights she had played for no one but herself aching to be heard. Each chord was a footstep, each arpeggio a heartbeat. She told them what it meant to be small and unseen and what it meant to rise anyway. Across the room, Richard Whitman sat in eerie stillness. The smirk he wore like a weapon had melted away. In its place, a grimace. He had meant to shame her to use her for entertainment, like a court jester in one of his dramatic evenings. But Anna had flipped the stage. The joke, if there had ever been one, had dissolved in reverence. As she moved into the second movement, her body relaxed into the music. The keys no longer felt cold. They pulsed under her fingers like something alive. Her breath steadied. The shame she had swallowed evaporated, replaced by something deeper, agency. And then it happened. A sound not from the piano, but from the back of the dining room. A chair scraped softly against the tile. A figure rose, slowly, steadily. It was James Carternott, the elder professor from the bar, but his son, a tall man in his late 40s, with a quiet composure earned not from ease, but endurance. Silver threaded through his dark hair. His blazer, though simple, fit with military precision, and in his eyes there was something neither cold nor sentimental, but fiercely present. He didn't speak, didn't gesture. He simply walked to the center of the room. Then came the crescendo, Anna's crescendo. Her spine arched with the weight of it. Her fingers danced not for beauty but for truth. It was thunder and hush all at once. And when the final chord faded into silence, it did not leave a vacuum. It left awe. James turned to Richard. "You thought this was a game," he said, voice low but unmistakably clear. "But what you witnessed was courage, and that's something you can't purchase, command, or humiliate." The room inhaled. James then turned to Anna. He didn't say thank you. He didn't clap. Instead, he bowed. Slow, deliberate. The kind of bow given to royalty or to soldiers who returned from battles no one saw. A murmur passed through the guests like a wave of wind before a storm. Then, another chair slid back. A woman in pearls stood. And another. One by one, people rose not for spectacle, but in recognition. The elder Mr. Carter stepped forward, his presence even quieter but equally commanding. His hand rested gently on his son's shoulder as he nodded to Anna, eyes filled with something between pride and apology. He didn't ask for attention. He carried it with him. He walked to Anna and handed her a card. Not with flourish, not with salesmanship, with intent. "The world needs more music like yours," he said. "Let's make sure they hear it." She took the card with trembling hands, her breath caught somewhere between sob and relief. The applause came then, not explosive but reverent, surrounding, embracing. Anna stood from the bench, her knees unsure beneath her. The restaurant had not returned to normal, and it never would. The energy had shifted. Something sacred had been witnessed. As she made her way back to the service lane, guests reached out with hushed encouragement. "Don't stop. You reminded me what grace looks like." That was holy. But not everyone spoke. The applause had faded, but the aftershock lived on, reverberating through Anna like a low, steady drumbeat beneath her ribs. She hadn't just played that night. She had reclaimed something not from Richard, not even from the guests, but from the part of herself she'd buried long ago under layers of service trays and silent compromise. As she stepped away from the piano, she didn't move like someone leaving a spotlight. She moved like someone who had finally stepped into the light. The air in Bellamy's had changed. Gone was the low hum of dominance and performance. What remained was reverence, weight, memory. The soft murmur of voices was different, now gentler, more careful, like guests walking through a sacred hall. Her co-workers noticed it too. There were no high fives or cheers, just quiet looks of awe and nods that carried decades of unspoken solidarity. One hostess who had never said more than 2 words to Anna before brushed her hand against hers as she passed and whispered, "You did that for all of us." In a small corner near the bar, a group of kitchen staff stood still, arms folded, expressions softened. They weren't watching a performance anymore. They were witnessing a shift. But not every table shared the same quiet. At table 6, Richard Whitman sat rigid, the confidence that once oozed from every gesture now congealed into a brittle, hollow silence. His companions avoided eye contact, their bravado long vanished, replaced by a tense, embarrassed stillness. It wasn't shame for what they'd done. It was discomfort in realizing they had been complicit in something cruel. Anna approached their tableau because she had to, but because it was her job. And tonight, she wasn't hiding behind the title of waitress. She was choosing it, owning it, reframing it. She set the bill down gently. Richard finally looked up. His voice was quieter than before, but the edge was still there, dulled, but not gone. "You made your point," he said. Bitterness clung to the words like stale perfume. "No need to drag it out." Anna met his eyes without blinking. "It was never about making a point," she said evenly. "I just wanted to play." It was simple, and it was true, and it stripped away whatever armor he still clung to. He had no reply. Just the tapping of his fingers against the base of his wine glass, a gesture that once symbolized control, now reduced to a nervous tick. But not everyone at his table mirrored his discomfort. One of the younger men, soft-spoken, unsure, with hair that fell into his eyes, glanced up at Anna with something more human. A hesitation, a reconsideration, a quiet apology without words. "You were incredible," he said, almost afraid to speak. "Truly." Anna didn't linger. She didn't dismiss him either. "Thank you," she said, and let her smile do the rest. As the night wound down, the dining room thinned. Chairs slid back, coats were gathered. The laughter, when it returned, was gentler, more aware. Bellamy's no longer felt like a stage for the powerful. It felt like a place where truth had been heard and could echo. Anna moved through the restaurant with a new gait. Not prideful, just present. She paused when guests stopped her. A woman with silver curls and pearl earrings gripped her hand. "Don't you ever stop playing, dear," she whispered, eyes wet. Another guest, an older man with oil-stained fingers and a mechanic's jacket, nodded at her with unshakable conviction. "That," he said, "was truth. Don't let anyone dim that light." Anna thanked them, but inside, she didn't feel like she was collecting compliments. It felt more like fuel, a quiet confirmation of something she had long feared wasn't real. Her gift, her voice, her right to take up space. By the time she cleared the final table, most of the guests had gone. She wiped down a corner booth by the window, her back to the room, when she saw a folded napkin tucked under a dessert plate. Table 6. Richard was gone, but he had left something behind. She hesitated, then picked it up. Inside, a rushed scrawl. "You proved your point, and you didn't have to say a word. That's more power than I've ever had." She folded the napkin carefully, slid it into her apron. She would never respond. He didn't deserve that. But it was closure, and in its own way, it was enough. She stepped outside into the cool Charleston night. The air was crisp. The streets were quiet, bathed in the amber glow of gas lanterns and the soft shuffle of distant footsteps. She didn't walk fast. She didn't look over her shoulder. Her spine was straight, her pace deliberate. Not triumphant, just certain. When she arrived at her apartment, small, paint peeling near the windows, filled with the scent of brewed tea and sheet music, she placed the napkin in a drawer beside her old metronome. She sat down at her upright piano. The bench wobbled. A few keys were chipped. But the sound that emerged as her fingers met the ivory was fuller than ever. She didn't play for an audience. She played for herself. She played for the girl who once taught herself notes by candlelight. She played for her mother, who never stopped believing in her. She played for every person who had once been told to be quiet. And most of all, she played because the music had always been there, waiting. 2 days later, the story had already started to spread. A few regulars told it to friends over Sunday brunch. "Did you hear about the waitress at Bellamy's?" they'd begin. "Took down a tech billionaire without saying a single word. Just a piano, just music." By Tuesday, someone had posted about it on a local blog. By Wednesday, a jazz podcast in Atlanta referenced it as the most graceful middle finger in musical history. Then came the call. Mr. James Carteth, music professor, who had risen and bowed that night, had passed along her name to a producer friend. Someone from a small but reputable label in Atlanta. He had been in the room that night, quietly observing, sitting in the far corner with his wife. He didn't offer fame. He didn't promise tours. He offered something more real. Studio time, a session, a chance to record a demo. A door, slightly ajar. Anna said yes, not because she believed her life would change overnight, but because for the first time in a long time she believed she was ready to walk through it. And that was enough. There are moments in life when we are called to step forward not because we feel ready, but because silence would mean losing a part of who we are. That night, Anna didn't seek the spotlight. It was thrust upon her through mockery and arrogance. And yet, in the face of humiliation, she didn't respond with anger. She answered with truth. Her music wasn't polished for grand stages or rehearsed for applause. It was lived in, raw, and honest. And in that quiet sincerity, it reached deeper than any boast ever could. For those of us who have lived long enough to know that time is our most precious currency, Anna's moment is a gentle reminder. We never age out of purpose. Our truth, our voice, our story, they still matter. Whether you're 25 or 75, courage doesn't always look like rebellion. Sometimes it's the steady walk toward a piano while the world watches, and playing anyway. So today, dust off that old melody. Pick up that forgotten brush. Call someone you love. Start the thing you've been putting off. Your moment hasn't passed. It may be waiting for you quietly, just like the music.